Research firm Savanta Comres has been running fascinating focus groups, seeing what currently undecided voters who voted Conservative in 2019 are making of events. Well, let's talk to Chris Hopkins, who's the Director of Political Research at Savanta Comres. He can join me now. Welcome to the programme. And you've been running these focus groups after Prime Minister's questions, something that a lot of the press gallery, a lot of the political lobby like to decree who's won or lost each week. I wonder, what did your focus group find this week, this Wednesday?
So they found that Boris Johnson won yet again. We've been running these for the last 3 weeks with that demographic of voters, Tom, that you mentioned, and all 3 times Boris Johnson has been seen to have won. Now, how useful a question that is remains to be seen. As you say, it perhaps is a slight Westminster sort of lobby obsession, but I still think it's an interesting question to ask the focus group, and it does generate some debate. I mean, ultimately, I think what they want to see from both leaders is a bit of honesty, a bit of integrity, and I think they don't get the impression that from either leader they really get that. And I think that because they did vote Conservative in 2019, it's very easy for Boris Johnson to maybe lose their vote, but it's very difficult for Keir Starmer to win it over. And ultimately, they want to see a lot more from him if they are going to trust him with their vote at the next election, whenever that may be.
It was interesting. I was reading some of the quotes from your focus group yesterday. And on the one hand, there were members who said of Boris that they thought that he was too repetitive about this vaccine rollout. Those watching on television can see this quote on their screens now. It's all talk about the vaccine rollout. It's almost ineffective. That's all he has. Whereas with Keir Starmer as well, they said that he was lacking in integrity. Let's have a look at what they said about Keir Starmer. I look upon Keir Starmer as more of a watered-down version of Boris. So when we look at those two perspectives from this group of people who are currently undecided but voted Conservative in 2019, the group that will really decide the next election in many ways, it's a bit of a plague on both your houses, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a little bit. And I think, one of the reasons that we picked this group, this demographic group of 2019 Conservative voters and currently undecided or might, lean towards to a non-Conservative party, I think was because, as you say, that they are going to decide the next election. Over the last few months, we've seen voting intention polls go from having a very comfortable Conservative lead that may have given the Conservatives a majority, albeit a reduced one if there was an election tomorrow, to now a very strong Labour lead, which might not give the Labour a majority, but may still at least make them the largest party and possibly able to govern without SNP support. So it's those people that have switched, that have changed the state of play in the last few months. And I think it's really interesting to therefore ask them why they're switching. And a lot of them, this is a broad cross-section of 2019 Conservative voters. Some of them will have been Conservative for a long time and have now put off the Conservative Party because of Partygate. But equally, some of them will have just lent the Conservatives their vote in 2019, either because they wanted to get Brexit over the line, whether they were Leavers or Remainers. They may have just been fed up of it not being done ultimately. But equally, they may have been put off by Jeremy Corbyn. But what we are still finding is that whether they dislike Boris Johnson over Partygate, Keir Starmer isn't doing enough to make them either go home back to the Labour Party or turn them towards the Labour Party, having been a relatively solid Conservative voter historically. So I think that does give us it's one of the quotes that comes up often in our focus group is that they're picking between the lesser of two evils, and I think that ultimately it's Starmer's job to try and win these voters over. And I think while they remain Conservative at the last election, but maybe just undecided, it's going to be far easier for Boris Johnson or potentially a new Conservative leader to win these voters back, and that is going to be a problem for Labour long term.
That's a fascinating point here, isn't it? Because this is what focus groups reveal, that just plain numbers when it comes to polling doesn't necessarily. If the Labour lead is in a sense a little artificial, if it's inflated not by Conservatives turning to Labour, but by Conservatives going undecided, thereby making the gap, making the Tories fall down but Labour stay relatively level, that makes it look like they've got a lead, whereas actually talking to those voters, those people who make up those numbers, potentially that lead is more flimsy than it might first appear.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And then, that is the statistical kind of anomaly that we are dealing with at the moment. That's not to say that we aren't seeing more Conservative 2019ers going to Labour than they were a few months ago. But still, there are more Conservative 2019ers that are undecided now than going to the Labour Party. And it is that group ultimately that is far easier long term for the Conservatives to try and win back. Now, obviously, there are still a lot of hurdles for Boris Johnson and the Conservative government to get over in the next few months, namely a cost of living crisis and the Metropolitan Police investigation into Partygate. And it's not to say that those undecided voters won't end up going to Labour, but I think that the point that is consistently coming through in these groups is that, yes, that they may be put off the Conservative Party at the moment. They may not have a lot of trust in Boris Johnson, and maybe other leaders wouldn't necessarily restore that trust. But Labour are not doing enough to win these voters over in large numbers at the moment. And Labour are holding on to their 2019 vote. They're winning a lot of Liberal Democrat votes and they're winning some Conservative votes, but possibly not enough long term to win the next general election.